Just imagine, you are an ordinary Ivan from Russian village who sold his последние лапти to buy a ticket on a steamboat to the United States in the early years of 20th century, and watching his homeland from the other side of the ocean. What would you see during your long life? Russo-Japanese War, Crisis, First World War, First Revolution, Second Revolution, Civil War, Red Terror, Polish-Soviet War, Поволжье Famine, Great Purge, Holodomor, Great Ukrainian Famine, Stalin's Terror, First Soviet-Japanese War, Gulag, Russo-Finnish Winter War, Second World War, After-War Famine, Repression, Stagnation of the planet economy, Chernobyl, War in Afghanistan, and the collapse of the country in the end of story. Ivan's descendants will see the poverty and lawlessness of the 90s, two wars in Chechnya, and all the delights of Putin's dictatorship. Unfortunately, Russia has never been a good country for life. That's why it's not surprising that we have 4 big immigration waves in the 20th century. And now we are watching the 5th wave, and I am part of this wave. Zero wave. The number is about 4.5 million migrants. First of all, it's important to talk about the so-called zero immigration wave in the second half of 90s and the early 20th centuries. This wave was not caused by any specific social, political and economic incidents, but by technological progress and the development of international communications. Similar processes have been observed all over the world. Many people from the old world moved to the new lands of freedom and opportunity, the United States, Canada and Australia. In other words, labor and business were the main reasons for immigration. The next reason was religion, including Jewish escape from persecution. Relatives of my ancestors also migrated to the United States due to persecution by the Russian Orthodox Church. They were Moloccans, Protestants from Orthodox Christianity, whose views on faith are closest to modern Baptists. Unfortunately, my parents lost connection with them, and all I know is that they lived in San Francisco, California. Who knows, maybe I'll find my distant relatives in the future. First wave, white emigre, about 2 million. At first I have to say that the name of this wave is not associated with skin color. However, the White Guard had its own Black Baron, the colors of the movements of this time expressed by the political views of them. Bolsheviks communists were red, radical centrists were green, anarchists of Nestor Makhno in Ukraine called themselves black. Contrary to popular belief, the core of the white movement didn't consist of supporters of the Tsar, but of the liberals who got power as a result of February Revolution. The movement was formed after the Bolshevik October Revolution, including people of various political views: social democrats, monarchists, nationalists, liberals and others who opposed the insane communist terror. However, the diversity of political views didn't allow the white movement to create a united force and interest the common people. At the same time, the Bolsheviks used populist slogans about the general enrichment for everyone and the most brutal fighting methods and tactics. The White Guard lost the war. Its survived members and supporters either left on their own or were forcibly expelled from the country by the new Soviet government. These were the most educated and respected groups of society. Professional military, scientists, artists, politicians, clergy, nobility, entrepreneurs and their families. For example, these were writer Vladimir Nabokov, Western star Yul Brynner, aviation pioneer Igor Sikorsky, composer Sergei Rachmaninoff, and thousands of other talents that their own country has lost forever. Second wave, Soviet defectors, the number is uncountable. I think this is the most tragic immigration wave in this list. It consisted of war prisoners, forcibly displaced workers, collaborators and other people from the German-occupied Soviet territory. After the fall of the Third Reich, those people had nowhere to go, because all of them were considered in their motherland as public enemies and traitors, regardless of the circumstances. Stalin prudently agreed with Roosevelt and Churchill at the Yalta Conference on the extradition of all Soviet citizens, excluding the countries occupied by USSR after the beginning of Second World War, Baltic states and Poland. Many Russians escaped extradition by hiding among the Poles, Balts and Belarusians. Some of them were hiding in an illegal position. The immigrants of the first wave fought for the rights of Soviet citizens who didn't want to return into the caring hands of Stalin. As a result, General Eisenhower signed a decree allowing former residents of the USSR to stay in the Allied occupation zone if they were not accused of war crimes on the side of the Nazis. Most of them eventually settled in Western Germany. However, a huge number of people were repressed by the Soviet authorities. Third wave, Emigration of Jews and dissidents, over 500,000. In addition to the terrible living conditions, anti-Semitism also flourished in the USSR. Of course, many Soviet Jews wanted to move to the new Jewish country of Israel, but it was not so easy to do. There were strict quotas and requirements for the departure of Jews. For political reasons, quotas were either expanded or reduced again. According to the same system, Soviet Germans also immigrated from the Union to West Germany. For everyone else, there were even fewer opportunities to leave the country of the Soviets, which required an exit visa, which was almost impossible to obtain. However, those who were lucky to find themselves abroad could simply refuse to return to their motherland. For example, the famous film director Andrei Tarkovsky didn't return after a trip to Cannes. A large number of Armenians moved in the same way, thanks to foreign relatives. Extreme ways to escape from the USSR were frequent. People hijacked planes and jumped from cruise ships. And there were cases of exchanging Soviet spies for dissidents. Fourth wave, brain drain, about 1.26 million. I need to explain that up to this point we've been talking about Russian Empire and Soviet Union, including Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia and other now independent republics. The empire included even Finland and Poland. However, this wave began 2 years before the collapse of the USSR when the perestroika started. General Secretary and the first and only President Mikhail Gorbachev tried to save the ruining country through economic and political liberalization. The Iron Curtain fell. Soviet citizens saw real life in the countries of rotten capitalism. But poor Soviet citizens couldn't afford to move to the rich countries of the West. Therefore, the basis of migration was made of scientists, techs and artists welcomed in the developed countries. This immigration wave went stronger in the 90s due to collapse of the country, the socio-economic crisis, the surge in crime, the war in Chechnya and the general political instability. In the early 21st century, the flow of immigration began to decline due to economic growth driven by high oil prices and the free market economic reforms of the previous decade. Exactly at this time, Putin gets the power and proclaims himself a savior, planting a time bomb under the country. Fifth wave, the great Putin Exodus, over 3 million. The fifth immigration wave has several features that make it possible to separate it from the previous brain drain. There was a short period of the second half of the zeros and early 10th years when the economic and political situation was relatively well. In those years, a small middle class was formed in large Russian cities. They were enterprising and educated people who could afford to travel abroad. Most of them had progressive political views and didn't support what began to happen in the country in the following years. The rigged parliamentary elections in 2011, the illegal election of Putin to a third term in 2012, and the brutal crackdown on protests have confirmed the authoritarian nature of the ruling regime. Migration began to pick up again, especially after 2014, the annexion of Crimea and the start of the covert war with Ukraine. Next decade, Putin launched a war on LGBT people, raised the retirement age, rewrote the constitution, declaring himself literally eternal president, stepped up repressions against the opposition and promoted hatred of all dissenters and the whole democratic world. The economy has stagnated due to sanctions and the outflow of investment and growing government intervention in business. Now I very much regret that I didn't leave Russia at that time, but tried to find the most comfortable conditions for immigration. I even tried to conduct anti-government agitation and supported Ukrainian patriots. It's a miracle that I didn't get into the eyes of the FSS. On the morning of February 24, 2022 year, we all woke up inside the endless nightmare. Our country initiated the worst invasion since WW2. This has become a point of no return for many people. In addition to those who left for reasons of conscience and political motives, there were many who simply saved their own skin from mobilization and economic concerns. But a much more terrible migration crisis has gripped Ukraine. People were forced to flee to foreign countries to save their lives. Unprepared for this, never thinking about immigration and dreaming of returning to their home, which perhaps was destroyed by the occupiers, whom I used to call my compatriots. Somewhere. This is the main difference between Ukrainian refugees and us. Their houses may be destroyed, but they have a home where they can return after the victory. Our houses are still intact, but we no longer have a home.